The noble story of Sithakati. In the southern region, there lived a man named Sithakati who belonged to the Labbai community. He was a man of immense wealth. He had taken a solemn vow never to refuse anyone who came to him with a request, always giving whatever was asked. As he continued this practice, his fame spread not only throughout the south, but also to the north and even to lands beyond. People from diverse communities and walks of life would flock to this benevolent philanthropist every day. This aroused the envy of the local king. The king summoned Sithakati, confiscated all his assets for the state, ordered him to leave the town within 2 days, and commanded that his grand mansions be demolished. Consequently, the houses were razed and the property seized. Sithakati sat at the entrance of his ruined home, pondering his next move. Just then, a poet arrived and asked for a reward. Sithakati immediately went inside, removed the thali, the only piece of jewelry his wife was wearing, brought it out, gave it to the poet, and returned to sit on the veranda. A short while later, another poet arrived, saying, "I have come from a very distant land. You must give me a fitting reward," he said. What could Sithakati do? It was not in his nature to say no. He had already given away even the thali from his wife's neck. He pondered the matter. He remembered that there was a snake mound in his backyard. "Very well, I shall put my hand into the mound and ask the serpent. If it bites me, I shall meet my end. If it gives me something, I shall bring it and present it to him." Resolving this within himself, he took the poet there.
After asking the poet to be seated, he went to the backyard, placed his hand inside the anthill, and said, "O King Cobra, a poet has arrived at my doorstep. I have never yet had to say no to anyone. Before I am forced to utter those words, I have nothing to give. Please give me something now to present to him. Otherwise, you might as well bite and kill me." The serpent inside emerged, placed a precious gem into his hand, and retreated. Sithakati brought the gem and gave it to the poet. News of this incident spread throughout the town and eventually reached the king. Suspicious, wondering how Sithakati possessed such a valuable gem after all his assets had been confiscated, the king summoned him and asked, "Where did you get the gem you gave to that poet?" Sithakati explained what had happened, but the king remained skeptical. "Show me. Ask that serpent to give another gem. Let us see," he demanded. Agreeing to prove it, Sithakati took the king to the anthill, extended his hand into it, and said, "O serpent, the king doubts me. If it is true that you gave me that gem, please give another one now, so that the king may realize I am a truthful man." The serpent slithered onto his hand, emerged from the anthill, regurgitated the life gem that sustained its very existence, and collapsed, dead. Upon seeing him, the king was astonished. He apologized for the wrongs he had committed against him, rebuilt all his houses, and restored his entire fortune. Sithakati resumed his life of boundless generosity, giving lavishly to all who asked without ever uttering the word no, and lived thus until his death. His relatives took his body and buried it. The day after the burial, a courtesan from the north arrived, hoping to alleviate her poverty by seeking Sithakati's help. Upon learning of his death, she was overcome with grief. She sat near his burial site and wailed in anguish, lamenting, "Alas, Sithakati! It was trusting in you that I left my kith and kin and traveled so far from my homeland. What shall I do now? I have been utterly undone." Just then, Sithakati's hand emerged from the earth. A ring adorned one of the fingers, and that specific finger extended outward. She removed the ring and departed, satisfied. This gave rise to the proverb, "Sithakati gave even after death." Therefore, like Sithakati, a practitioner of yoga should practice charity. As one gives repeatedly, this small self expands and grows, eventually pervading the entire universe. Conversely, By hoarding without giving to anyone, this already small self shrinks further, becoming increasingly trivial and petty. As one continues to give, the demons of I and mine perish and are destroyed. Therefore, a practitioner of yoga must always cultivate a charitable nature. The fifth division of niyama, worship of the divine, Ishwara Puja. One who wishes to practice yoga must worship the divine in the specific manner, name, and form that their mind prefers and desires to contemplate. This act of worship elevates the mind above the mundane world and purifies it. It is also a means to achieve mental one-pointedness. The sixth division of niyama, association with the wise, sadhu sangha. Association plays a significant role in shaping a person's character and actions. Therefore, a yoga practitioner should always seek the company of the wise, sadhus. If a practitioner, who aims to control and steady the mind, spends their time associating with worldly, deluded individuals, how can the mind ever become focused? The company of restless or fickle-minded people will inevitably lead them astray. Thus, one must forsake worldly associations and seek the company of the wise. There is an English proverb, "Tell me your company, and I will tell you who you are." This implies that the nature of one's character can be determined by the company one keeps. Indeed, our own experience shows us how people can attain greatness through their associations.
Do we not also see instances of lowliness? Even the dogs belonging to high-ranking officials sit on luxurious cushions, simply because they had the privilege of being with their masters, do they not? In the town of Avantipuram, although the people were abjectly poor, they were cruel, wicked, thieves and murderers. She revealed the secret of obtaining gold to them. When she told her husband about it, he secretly followed the shepherd one day. He was astonished to witness the shepherd urinating on the head of the Shiva Lingam and seeing the surrounding soil turn into gold. After the shepherd left, he went to the same spot and urinated. The soil there turned into gold as well. He gathered it and returned home. Gradually the news spread from a few people to everyone. Alas, what a sacrilege! That Shiva Lingam was subjected to a ceaseless abhishekam, ritual bath, of urine. Subsequently, the king of the land built a temple for that Shiva Lingam and issued a decree. Those who urinate on its head to obtain gold must surrender 1/4 of the gold they collect to the government. The people gathered and deliberated, unwilling to part with even the slightest fraction of the gold they earned through the arduous effort of urinating. They decided instead to install Shiva Lingams in their own homes and perform the ritual bath of urine there to acquire gold. Immediately, stonemasons found themselves with non-stop work, day and night. At least one Shiva Lingam was installed in every household. Believing that consuming solid food would result in less urine output, the people,
Like the people of Kerala, they began to consume kanji, rice gruel. Was that all? They would go to neighboring villages, much like fetching rice-washing water for cattle, and return with pots full of the urine collected from the deity. The entire town became awash with gold. It became filled with countless multi-storied mansions. The people grew bloated with wealth, wickedness abounded, and the 5 great sins proliferated. Some time passed in this manner. Observing this, Lord Shiva resolved, their arrogance must be quelled, and they must meet their destruction. In that town, amidst thousands of wicked people, there lived a single impoverished Brahmin. He found the conduct of the townspeople intolerable. He lived by unjavriti, subsisting on alms of uncooked rice. However, once the people began acquiring gold through the ritual of bathing the Shiva Linga with urine, no one showed him any compassion. They advised him to earn gold just as they did, by bathing the Shiva Linga with urine. Covering his ears with his hands, he cried out, "Alas, what an atrocity is this! Why earn gold by committing such a heinous sin? O people, do not burden yourselves with sin. Do not commit an offense against the Lord. For saying this, they reviled, scolded, and tormented him in various ways. Undeterred in spirit, and unable to obtain alms in his own village, he would go to neighboring villages daily to beg. He would bring back the grain he received, process and cook it, and, after 3 in the afternoon, he and his family would contentedly partake of whatever meager portion was available, even if it amounted to only half or a quarter of a full meal. One day, while he was returning home after begging in the neighboring villages, past noon, the Lord appeared before him in the guise of a Brahmin and said, "O noble Brahmin, because the townspeople are repeatedly committing the 5 great sins without the slightest fear, tomorrow morning 2 suns will rise simultaneously and incinerate both your town and its inhabitants. Afterward, the 7 clouds will gather and pour down rain to wash away even the ashes of these great sinners, sweeping everything into the ocean. Since you are a devout soul, I came specifically to warn you. You must leave the town this very day," he said before departing. The pious Brahmin ran at full speed. In his haste, the sack of rice he had collected through alms fell somewhere along the way. Yet he did not run toward his own home. Instead, he went to the house of every single resident, urging them, "Sir, this town is destined to be destroyed tomorrow. Please leave the town immediately." They replied, "Hey, Brahmin, is it because we are wealthy and you are a beggar that you harbor such envy towards us?" they demanded, verbally abusing him and physically assaulting him. Finally, he returned home, gathered his wife and children, and left the town. The next day dawned. 12 suns rose simultaneously. Fire broke out and began to rage everywhere. There was no place left for anyone to escape. Very quickly, everything, even stones and earth that had been touched by those sinners, burned, charred, and turned to ash. Then, a torrential downpour, like the rains of cosmic dissolution, descended. A massive flood swept all the ash away into the ocean. Hearing of this, the king of the neighboring town sought out the pious Brahmin, welcomed him with hospitality, and he brought him along to visit the ruined town. Everywhere one looked, there was nothing but a vast open expanse, yet a single hut remained unscathed by the sun and rain. Even more astonishingly, a spider that had built its web in that hut was still alive and moving about. Its web, too, remained intact. Because of the association with a saintly Brahmin, the hut, the spider, and its web had been spared from destruction. Such is the glory of the company of the wise. Did not even a dog attain liberation through its association with Yudhishthira? Therefore, if an ordinary person wishes to elevate themselves, they must seek the company of the wise. A practitioner of yoga, striving to subdue the ego, conquer the 5 senses, and attain the bliss of transcendental awareness, must certainly seek such company. Section 7. Of Niyama, Humility. One must show appropriate respect when encountering elders. One should not speak loudly or boisterously in their presence. One should not argue with them merely to demonstrate one's own cleverness before others. One should not remain seated while elders are standing. If elders arrive where one is seated, one must immediately rise to show respect and sit down only after they have taken their seats. Section 8. Of Niyama, Wisdom. One must possess the ability to execute a task only after thoroughly analyzing it and arriving at a firm, well-considered decision. Deliberate well before undertaking an action. To reflect upon it after the deed is done is a folly. If one undertakes any action without careful consideration, the outcome may prove disastrous, even if the initial intention was noble. A man once found a bear cub alone in the forest, brought it home, and raised it. The bear grew up showing him affection just as a child would for its parent. One day, the man fell asleep with his head resting on the bear's lap. A fly landed on his face. The bear, which loved the man deeply, thought, "How dare a fly land on my beloved master's face?" It struck a powerful blow to swat the fly. However, that blow killed not only the fly, but the man as well. Therefore, a good intention alone is insufficient. One also requires the wisdom to analyze and reflect. If wisdom is essential for dealing with the material world, how much more subtle and sharp must that wisdom be for a yoga practitioner who ventures into the realm of the subtle universe? The 9th division of yama, sense control. Just as a tortoise withdraws all its limbs inward, revealing only its shell when it senses danger, a yoga practitioner must restrain all their senses and withdraw their consciousness inward when anticipating harm from the external world, remaining simply as the physical body. If the mind constantly wanders outward through the apertures of the eyes, ears, and nose, how can it be brought under control? And if the mind is not controlled, how can the practice of yoga succeed? Therefore, a practitioner of yoga must subdue and steady the 5 senses. The 10th division of Niyama Yagna, sacrificial offering. One must steady the mind and cultivate the yagna of single-pointed concentration. As the fire of this yagna grows, all negative qualities, such as lust and anger, fall into it and are reduced to ashes. Vedic chanting and the repetition of mantras, japa, purify the sattva element within the body, known as svadhyaya, self-study, scriptural study. Mantra japa is of 3 types. They are, number 1, ucharana, number 2, arthocharana, number 3, manasika. Number 1, ucharana japa. This is considered the lowest form. Ucharana japa involves chanting aloud. Number 2, arthocharana japa. This involves chanting silently within the mouth, where only the lips move and no audible sound is produced. Number 3, manasika japa. This is considered the supreme form. Meditating upon the mantra and its meaning within the mind is known as manasika japa, mental repetition. This is considered the most exalted form. Sages and scriptures speak of 2 types of purification: antaranga shuddhi, internal purification, and bahiranga shuddhi, external purification. 1. Bahiranga shuddhi consists of cleansing the body by scrubbing and washing it with earth, water, and other substances. 2. Antaranga shuddhi refers to purifying the mind through virtues such as truthfulness and nonviolence. Both external and internal purification are essential for a practitioner of yoga. It is not enough to have internal purity while the exterior remains unclean. In situations where external purification is not feasible, such as when facilities like water for bathing are unavailable, internal purity is paramount. Nevertheless, both forms of purification are indispensable for the yoga practitioner. We have already discussed the sequences of asanas and pranayama to the necessary extent. For the practice of Raja Yoga, extensive detail on these is not required. For a Raja Yogi, Padmasana, Virasana, or Siddhasana are the most suitable postures. The 3rd limb of yoga, Pratyahara. Pratyahara is the act of restraining and controlling the senses, preventing them from wandering outwardly like a stray dog. Let us briefly examine how sensory perception arises. First come the karmendriyas, organs of action, followed by the jnanendriyas, organs of perception. These organs of perception function within the body through the brain. They function. Subsequently, the mind comes into play. When the mind, the brain, the organs of perception, and the organs of action all unite and engage with an external object, we perceive it. However, focusing the mind and directing it toward a single sense organ is extremely difficult. There is no child who has not been taught, do not harm anyone, do not lie, or do not steal. Yet mere instruction, lofty speeches, and empty words has never succeeded in making anyone actually live by those teachings. We do not teach how to avoid harming, stealing, or lying. We simply say, do not steal, or do not lie, without explaining the why or the how. Indeed, we ourselves do not know the why or the how. That is why we ourselves fail to refrain from stealing or lying, and why the advice we give to others proves ineffective. Only when one has learned to control the mind does such instruction bear fruit. Internal and external actions take place only when the mind connects with the sense organs. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the mind inevitably connects with the senses. This is why people end up committing foolish acts. Had their minds been under control, they would not have committed such deeds. If one asks, what is the benefit of subduing the mind? The answer is that the mind ceases to connect with the sense organs, and consequently, emotional impulses and volitional thoughts vanish. However, such a state of mental stillness can be observed even among ordinary people. There are many healers who cure illness and suffering by leading patients to believe that they are neither sick nor in distress. It is well known that practices like mesmerism and hypnotism are gaining popularity in the West. Their methods, too, represent merely one aspect of the practice of yoga. Blindly following a particular path,
they stumbled upon this method almost by accident, much like someone tripping and stepping on a gold bar while walking. A person who has learned to steady and focus their mind can manipulate a person with a weak mind at will. Mesmerism and hypnotism are essentially the domination and control of a weak mind by a strong one. Consider a man suffering terribly from a stomachache. A healer arrives, strokes the man's abdomen a few times with neem leaves, applies sacred ash or vibhuti, and asks, "Isn't the pain a little better now?" Believing that his ailment has eased slightly, the patient replies, "Yes." The healer repeats the process and the question a few more times. The patient's confidence grows steadily. He comes to believe that he is completely cured. And indeed, he is. The healer's neem leaves and sacred ash serve merely to instill faith in the patient. They do not cure the illness directly. By nature, the minds of the sick are weak. Thus, what the healer actually does is manipulate the patient's weak mind with his own strong will, compelling the patient to believe whatever he desires. Following the principle, as one thinks, so one becomes, the patient visualizes himself as healthy, and he becomes healthy. Street magicians' sleight-of-hand tricks operate on the same principle, exploiting the weak, scattered minds of the crowd.
He subdues the mind entirely through the strength of his own will, compelling it to obey him. However, suppressing the mind in this manner ultimately leads to harm. This is because the mind is not being subdued by the individual's own volition. Rather, it appears subdued only due to a powerful blow from an external mental force. The mind is merely stunned into submission rather than voluntarily yielding. The practice of yoga is akin to halting a wild runaway horse by firmly pulling its reins. Conversely, practices like mesmerism and hypnotism are akin to having someone else strike the horse violently. A person whose mind is subdued in this way gradually loses his mental faculties, eventually becoming a useless fool or a madman. Only an effort made through one's own personal endeavor is conducive to yoga. Even if one uses the power of one's own mind to influence others and do them good, that benefit is merely temporary and will ultimately result in harm. Although one might subdue and control another's mind to steer them toward virtuous conduct, their mind, which ought to remain free, becomes habituated to subjugation. It eventually succumbs to a state of mental slavery and develops a destructive tendency. Consequently, the spiritual liberation, moksha, of that soul is delayed. Therefore, it is better to refrain from subduing or dominating another's mind, even for a good cause, because the ultimate goal of human life is liberation. The The true goal of human existence is to break free from the state of being enslaved by the vast material world and one's own mind.
The goal of human birth is to liberate oneself from both gross and subtle Prakriti, nature or matter, to conquer and master it, and thus become its sovereign. Therefore, attempting to subdue another person's mind conditions that mind to a state of servility. Such practices are, for this reason, to be shunned. One must learn to control the mind through one's own effort. To begin with, let us observe the mind as it follows its own course. It will remain restless. Let it leap and bound as it pleases. Let us simply watch the spectacle. If we detach ourselves from the mind and observe its erratic antics, the mind, after leaping high into the air and beyond, will eventually subside on its own. Initially, a multitude of endless thoughts will arise, and the mind will leap wildly, only to fall and suffer repeated shocks. Yet, through this process, it will settle down, and its turbulence will gradually cease. This process of subduing the mind is known as pratyahara. It is achieved only through years of ceaseless practice. Pratyahara is the practice of restraining the mind so that it does not wander outward. Dharana is the practice of fixing the mind once it has been restrained from wandering outward upon a specific object. However, some define dharana as fixing the mind upon specific points or a single point in the body itself. When the mind is controlled and held steady at a single point, it is called dharana. This practice of dharana is described in various ways. The mind is instructed to focus on the heart. But how does one focus on the heart?
What form should be assigned to the heart? One should visualize it in the shape of a lotus, conceive of it as a form of divine light, and fix the mind upon it. Alternatively, one may visualize a lotus in a lake, conceive of it as a form of divine light, and meditate upon it. Or, one may meditate on any one of the 6 adharas, energy centers, located along the path of the Sushumna Nadi. The practitioner of yoga should always remain in solitude and practice ceaselessly. If one stays amidst crowds, the yogi's mind becomes agitated due to association with various types of people. He should not speak excessively, for idle chatter and excessive talking have the power to disturb the human mind. Furthermore, he should not engage in excessive physical labor, because physical exhaustion weakens the mind. Through the practice of yoga, the mind gains clarity and steadfastness, allowing all matters to be perceived in their true light. One's nature undergoes a transformation, and the body becomes healthy. There is no doubt that once a yoga practitioner begins to practice dharana, concentration, the body becomes healthy and robust.
It was with this very eye on his forehead that Lord Shiva reduced Manmatha to ashes. Within this triangular zone of fire, establish this sacred syllable Om, the Pranava, and ensure that your mind meditates upon it constantly. The glory of the syllable Om is immeasurable. Sages have bestowed the name Om upon that singular reality known as Brahman and the Atman. The mother of the Vedas, in her arduous quest to elucidate the true nature of this reality, despite deploying all her facets and expending immense effort, ultimately concluded her exposition by uttering Om. This Pranava syllable is formed by the union of 3 distinct sounds, Akara, Ukara, and Makara.